So it's back again, the Spectral 2021 Mullet. So this is the CF8. I've already been over the spec, you'll know what it is. So when I tested this bike, my biggest gripe was the rear shock. So it was, to me, it felt like it was definitely over damped in the high speed compression. It wasn't getting out of the way of hits. It'd be smooth in some situations, but then when you start to charge and try and hit rough stuff, it was just horrible. So tuned around it, did what I could, and gave the bike back. And Aaron was happy enough to send the shock away and get the tune changed. So he sent it away. Cyclinic have changed the tune, and it is night and day. Night and day. Might as well be a different shock. Bike is now in the low position. I can now run a little bit of preload on this 350 spring to bring my ride height to where I want it. It's still too low in the low position with the 170 crank on it. So if these were a 165 crank, I'd feel better with it in the low position. But as it is now, it's like just a little bit low with the long cranks. Still hauls, still fine, but yeah, I'd prefer the shorter crank. If you're going to stick with the longer crank, you'd probably prefer it in the high position. But saying that, I rode it at Horsey's the other day in the high position with everything else as it is, and the rear shock obviously in this tune, and found that it was a little tool in the back when I came into the gnarlier stuff. So into the kind of steep chutes and where you go from here to kind of pointing down the hill, you really want your butt to be and your feet to be anchored down, not up. So I guess the moral of the story is that tune is absolutely too sharp from standard, absolutely too sharp. So definitely get a lighter compression tune if you've got this bike. Otherwise, if you're just riding flow trail and smooth, groomed stuff, and you just want to hit big jumps and big sends, just leave it. You won't really need the bump compliance out of it. You're more or less just looking for resistance to movement. So, which it's got plenty of that, but with the lighter tune, way more variety of terrain can be just way easier to deal with. Much easier to deal with. Before it was just horrible. It was real choppy on the feet and really uncontrollable. You couldn't really hold on to it when things got real rough. You could drop it, dump it real low in the sag, like run a real soft spring rate, but that'd be crap as well. It wouldn't climb well, you'd be super low, so you'd definitely have to be in the high position, and you'd probably end up clapping it off the bottom. I never clapped it off the bottom. I reckon I touched the bottom once at Horsey's, a big compression, so didn't feel the bottom, but I'm sure I reckon I touched it. And that was with no preload, and then I started to add a bit of preload. 5 clicks in from open and 5 clicks in from closed on the compression seemed to be like the sweet spot. Adding a little bit more was good as well, but it started to get in the way of bumps a little bit. Backing it off became a little bit sloppy. Like when you're adding compression, I've explained it before, you go from, if you've got no compression, you go from this like to add a little bit of compression, and it starts flowing nicely, and then you add too much compression and it's like it becomes woody. So I'm at that flowy position where there's enough compression to push against, to dance on, and to control when you're loading in turns, but not enough to resist those chatter bumps and impacts that are going to slow you down otherwise. So impressed with the rear shock now. The fork, I didn't really get along with this fork because the 36 Performance Elite Grip 2 damper, so I've got a fair idea of where to go with the damper. But the spring configuration, I started with a token, took a token out, and it was better. It was definitely better when I had the other tune. It matched what the rear was doing. I was able to match what the rear was doing and find a harmony, find a balance. I wouldn't call it a harmony, but a balance. Now that that's better, I've had to reassess the front, and today I went back to a token and then took a token out again, and I think it's still going to be no token unless I go 2 or 3 tokens and change the curve of the spring completely and dump that front a little bit lower. It's not something I've it's inconclusive. I haven't concluded my thoughts on this 36 yet. I have to give it back, so I'm out of time. It's been a pretty busy week, but I liked the no token, but I didn't like the. I don't know if it needs no token. It might need a couple of tokens. It might, and even then, it doesn't feel the rate doesn't feel right. I've ridden these forks. I'm assuming the spring is the same as the 2019, same as the 2020. This is a 21 or 22, so I don't know whether they've changed the spring a little bit, changed the maybe made the neg even bigger, or maybe they've made it. I don't know. Not sure what they've done, but might be exactly the same. I have serviced it, so I know it's running well. I just couldn't quite find. Today anyway, I couldn't quite find ultimate control and plough. It's just a little soft. It almost definitely, I should have measured the sag, but it almost definitely was probably just a little soft on the spring. So, fork, inconclusive. The bike climbed better today. I got my best time climbing today. It was a 16:58 up lap climb left at Waterfall Gully, but the descent wasn't any good. I stopped and was not quite getting along with the fork, and made a couple of changes to see where I was at. So the descending time was whatever, but climbing was definitely more supple, getting out of the way of things, and felt like it was more efficient with this lighter compression tune. So just feeling less of the trail. The frame itself is still super stiff. You definitely get all the feedback through the frame. Every carbon more or less every carbon frame I've ridden has been the same. You cop a lot of feedback through a carbon frame because it's so stiff. It's got nowhere for that chatter to go. It just goes straight into you. So that's kind of part of the reason I don't really rate carbon frames over a good strong alloy frame. But super stiff, I assume super strong, and way better with that tune. So if you don't want to mess around with the tune, maybe go on air shock. But then you're dealing with different temperature, the shock's going to feel a bit different and whatever, but you could definitely find a good tune. I feel like the bike's too progressive. I feel like this bike is too progressive. And I think a lot of people, with the advent of the Cascade link and for different bikes, and everyone's going, more progressive must be more better, but it's not. It's not. It's like saying more, someone's running 10 psi in their tyres in a 2.5 tyre, and you go, more pressure's better. Like, for 10 psi, more pressure is definitely better. But if you're at 40 psi, more pressure is not better. It's all relative. So your progressivity in your frame, how much harder it is to go through the end of the travel than it is at the start of the travel, is relative. And I think this is around the 27% mark. They say it's the same as the Slash. It feels much more progressive than my Slash. For whatever reason, and that could just be geometry. That's making me feel that, and not enough time on it maybe in the low position. But it's definitely too progressive in my opinion. If you were to run this at 20%, you could get you could get a wicked suspension platform. You'd have to alter ride heights and whatever, and being it's got a flip chips, you can probably work around it anyway. But I think 20% on any bike, 15 to 25 is the usable range, or the good, like, high performance range of progressivity. And 20, 22 I think is the sweet spot. You could run a coil or an air shock on any of those configurations, 15 to 25. Obviously 15 you'd be running a little oversprung to avoid bottom out. 25 you'd be running just a slightly less spring and ramping, but I think that 20 where you can run a fairly stiff spring off the top with no real chop behind it that's just money. 18 to 20 is just absolute money for progression. So enough about this thing. Thank you very much for letting me borrow it, dude. I'm just so lucky. I am so lucky that people let me ride their bikes, so I appreciate it. And it's better, it's killer. I'm not too sure exactly where I'm at with rebound from closed, but it's not really fast. I don't feel like I need to run this bike fast. If you run it kind of like fast car park feel, it gets a little squirty, like a little whoop whoop off the back. So it's killer. It's fun. if I could get that fork dialed, I would have had a lot more fun again. But doesn't matter. It is what it is, and I'll move on to the next one. Thank you.